Sasvati Deve Govani Pachaini Nirvishisha Shunivari Pasatari Shatarine Vanchakapa Dubasha Kripas and Vivata Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Bhava Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadada Shivasadi Go Bhaktabanda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Yes, before we start with our topic for today, which is mainly centered around death, our final challenge, let me just quickly refresh our memory. So last Wednesday, it was probably the most practical session out of the whole seminar, where we discussed these 3 practical principles which we can extricate from forest life and apply them in our life, no matter where we may be. And principle number 1 was simplifying our life, our surroundings, getting rid of so many things, making things more and more simple. Principle number 2 was simplifying our externals. This is especially relevant for us ladies, that we really, we give up the, mood and tendency of decorating ourselves and being colorful and all that kind of thing. And eventually go into white with border, shorten the hair, and also for the men, same thing is there. And for the men, it also includes, losing our attachment to all different gadgets and fancy watches and all the latest models of, phones and tablets and computers and cars and whatever it may be. So, and then the last one was simplifying our eating. Again, if we live in the forest, there obviously we will not have gulab jammuns and pizza and all these things. So it will be very, very simple. And we extricate that principle and we can, cultivate it. So basically, Vanaprastha Ashram, it is a matter of internal cultivation of these principles. And the goal of it all is to free our minds of so many attachments. And so we minimize all these distractions so we can concentrate on deepening our hearing and chanting. That's what it's all about. I want to add just a couple little things which we did not mention on Wednesday, like simplifying our surroundings, our living facilities. This also may include, that we reduce the standard of life, meaning that we, especially if we don't have children, then it may just not be practical in old age to actually have a house, because we have to look a little ahead. And I often come across this when devotees ask me for some guidance for, their cultivation of Vanaprastha Ashram. That if a couple has no children and they have a house, so obviously the time will come, when the husband cannot climb up on the roof and look what's happening there and this and that. It's a practical matter. Having a house is involving a lot of maintenance and work and repairs, and this will just burden us in old age, and it will distract us, apart from the fact that the physical strength will not be there to work in the garden and fix the house. But it also simply will distract our mind, and we will be just so busy, with all this maintenance, and then there will not be much time and energy left for hearing and chanting. So I usually advise people, not to burden themselves with, big properties in the old age, which needs to be maintained and looked after. So, better, especially if there's no children, if maybe, the children live upstairs in the flat and we just have some little quarters downstairs and they look after the maintenance, all right. But still, as we said, an important principle of Vanaprastha Ashram is that we leave the cozy home. And I know a few devotees who actually made the step. The children were grown up and they sold their house. They realized, well, what for? What for having all this? Especially if the children don't want to live in that house, they don't want to live in that area, they may want to live somewhere else, so this all has to be carefully considered, that we really reduce our worldly responsibilities, and that includes property, So, yeah, important to consider that. But of course, we have to look at the individual situation. We cannot make some rule of Vanaprastha should not own a house or something. Of course, not like that. But it's just a practical matter that we want to simplify our life, and not burden ourselves in old age with properties and houses and all this. This is good when you have children, then it's nice to have a house and they can play in the garden and all this. But if the children are grown up, then what for? What for, And there is attachment there, naturally, because one may have lived for so many years in this house and raised the children there and but yeah, sooner or later we have to leave it behind anyway, and it frees the mind from all, the attachment which is stored there in the mind, Yeah, that's one thing. And then just another general realization is that now where we have some idea about Vanaprastha Ashram, what it is all about, we definitely can say that if actually more devotees would understand the importance of this Vanaprastha Ashram, we would have so many more devotees who would be absorbed in serving and preaching. I strongly feel at the moment we are missing out on so much, on so much assets there, in form of devotees who have really gathered some life experience. They have some wealth of wisdom and realizations, but very often they're sitting idle and just in their homes doing their thing, doing their maintenance thing, and all this potential is unused. And yeah, I mean, I think I shared in the beginning, how in Ukraine I started this Varishta Vaishnavi ashram and so on, where I invited some ladies who are really dedicated to just serving the rest of their life, the deities and the community. And rather than sitting somewhere in a flat and having to earn money and pay rent and so on. And I have seen in practical examples that really ISKCON is gaining so much, if we can just encourage devotees, and if there's also a little bit of support that, yes, don't worry, you will be taken care of if you just dedicate the rest of your life to serving Prabhupada's mission. And so much potential will be all of a sudden released, So, this is really, a strong point, because often people are just busy with their properties and their business and their garden and all this. But then in old age, what for, So if people just take this Vanaprastha Ashram more seriously, then Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement will gain so much. I'm convinced of it, I'm convinced, because I can see it in some situations where devotees can contribute so much, if they just receive that encouragement and support to actually move into this direction of Vanaprastha Ashram and fully dedicate themselves to serving and preaching or whatever their tendencies and natures may be. Okay, that just as a little additional comment. So I believe everybody has the materials, right? Yeah, Elder Prabhu has up on the top there is the link to the materials. So please have a look there and download them, because we will read a few quotes also again today. So yes, today's session is the topic of death, our final challenge, because ultimately this is what Vanaprastha Ashram is all about. Very clearly, we want to prepare for death so that we meet this final challenge in a glorious way and we get out of the material world. And I find it very helpful if we can actually more clearly understand what exactly happens at that moment of death. I find this a very intriguing and fascinating topic. In fact, some of you may know I used to work in the medical fields and before I became a devotee, and even there I saw several times people leaving their body, and I was always so intrigued what actually takes place there, what is happening there. And yeah, this is, I guess, one reason why I was searching also, because I wanted to find some answers to these questions. And nobody could really explain me anything, until I finally met the devotees and read the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and already there you find so many answers. So, and definitely the more we confront ourselves with this topic of leaving the body, that will also reduce our fear. Fear is always a sign of ignorance. So if we, avoid this topic and we sweep it under the carpet and we don't want to hear or know about it, then of course there's so much ignorance there and therefore so much fear. But the more we really, look into the whole thing, then actually we will see it's not that fearful. Not at all. We've done it already also many times. We just don't remember. But not such a horrifying thing, actually. And yeah, one can even almost look forward to it, if we get a bit more insights. And yes. So let us have a look here at the little introductory session. I, want to briefly touch upon the point that a materialist and a spiritualist meets death with a very different attitude, completely different. So let us begin by reading a few quotes here from 2nd Canto, 1st chapter, 15th verse. This is I just took one sentence out of it. I think it is the verse actually, not the purport. So there it says, at the last stage of one's life, one should be bold enough not to be afraid of death. I think this is already very nice. We should be bold enough not to be afraid of death. But one must cut off all attachment to the material body and everything pertaining to it, and all desires thereof. So, yeah, it is a challenge. It is not so easy, one must cut off all attachments. And we will later, maybe tomorrow, also come across a verse where Prabhupada says, friends, family members, everything we will have to cut off, even friends, so Krishna will have to be our only object of love and connection, Yeah, so certainly it needs some preparation, But yeah, a devotee is not actually afraid of death, really, Next purport here, 4:27-24. Because a devotee rigidly follows the instructions of Narada Muni, he has no fear of old age, disease, or death. Apparently, a devotee may grow old, but he is not subjected to the symptoms of defeat experienced by a common man in old age. This is already very nicely put, because a materialist, a non-devotee, he feels defeated by old age, or everything is taken away from him and he cannot enjoy anymore. And he becomes all miserable, and there's this sense of defeat, But a devotee doesn't experience that if he rigidly follows the instructions of Narada Muni. Consequently, old age does not make a devotee fearful of death, as a common man is fearful of death. When jara, or old age, takes shelter of a devotee, Kalakanya is the daughter of time, which is invalidity. Kalakanya diminishes the devotee's fear. A devotee knows that after death, he is going back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, he has no fear of death. Thus, instead of depressing a devotee, advanced age helps him become fearless and thus happy. Wow, so, I mean, there's some hope there. It is simply just, a question of Krishna consciousness, of actually getting a deeper understanding that, yes, death is simply the point where we are tested. We will get to that later. 3:26:16. The influence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is felt in the time factor, which causes fear of death due to the false ego of the deluded soul who has contacted material nature. Yeah, so this is also a big topic and very interesting, that Krishna is also appearing as the time factor. And time brings about this old age and death, and everything is dwindling and falling apart. So Krishna has arranged this whole scenario here in the material world in such a tricky way that this time factor, brings about death. And if one is not on the transcendental platform, then there's that fear there, because time takes everything away, and all the enjoyment, all our attachments, they're taken, they're ripped off us, stripped off us, basically. So, and there's also another statement in the Bhagavatam that actually death is not an experience of the soul. It is simply experienced on the platform of false ego. It has nothing to do with the soul, The soul is not dying. The soul is completely untouched by death. But because we are identifying with the body, through the false ego meaning we think to be something which we are not. Actually, let me just at this point already announce that on the 9th of January, I would like to, after tomorrow is our last session on this topic, and then 9th of January, that's a Saturday, there I would like to offer the false ego course. The false ego, our constant companion and troublemaker. This is also one of my favorite topics. I wrote a whole book about it. And yeah, so same time, I think like now, I think this is quite suitable for devotees from America or Europe and so on, so you can already take note of this. It will be the same link, and I will post again some posters on the Facebook page of the Institute of Spiritual Culture, and I will send it to some of you, and you can share it with your friends and so on. Just as a little announcement. Yeah, so death is not an experience on the level of the soul. It is simply coming through this identification with the body. And it is actually an experience on the level of the false ego. You know? And then Bhagavad Gita 10:34, Mrityusarva Sahasracham. I am all devouring death, Krishna says. Purport. As soon as a man is born, he dies at every moment. Thus, death is devouring everything, every living entity at every moment. Thus, death is devouring every living entity at every moment. But the last stroke is called death itself. That death is Krishna. So in other words, you know, we can't avoid surrendering to Krishna. Either we do it voluntarily, we surrender to his sweet and charming Shamasundra form, or we are forced by death, you know, devouring everything. So that is also Krishna, you know. So we have that choice. And yeah, and the materialist is defeated by death, you know, Krishna in the form of all devouring death, you know. So yeah, in short, we can say a materialist meets death as being the most horrifying thing, you know, ghastly. There's so much denial there, you know, so much denial. Oh my God, you know. I also had that experience when I was doing chemotherapy. This gives quite a bit of realizations, you know, because usually when you take chemo, you have to go, you know, every 3 weeks or every 4 weeks, and you get a drip, you know, you sit there for a few hours, and most hospitals have a big room where everybody sits there in a circle, and you get to know the patients, you know, because you meet all the time at the same day there. Everybody comes, takes their chemo. So people start some conversations, you know. And I remember once there was this man next to me also taking his chemo, and he struck up a conversation there. And usually people, the first thing they ask is, so how many treatments do you have to take, and so on. That's always the first question, you know. So, and I was talking to him, and then at some point he was saying, these treatments are horrible, but the alternative is also not very good, you know, meaning leaving one's body. And I just couldn't help myself. It just came out of my mouth, and I said, well, we're not going to be able to avoid death. You know, it's going to happen with chemo or without chemo. And he was completely shocked. He was completely flabbergasted, you know. But this is what people are like. They think, you know, that they can avoid death just by continuing with these treatments. And they think they become immortal or something, you know, rather than understanding, I mean, sooner or later, I'm going to have to face this moment. So there's so much denial there. It's amazing, you know, even if people are in the last stage of cancer or something, they just can't confront themselves with this fact that they're going to have to leave. And I mean, it's actually so sad, you know, how people spent their last phase in life in so much ignorance and so much fear, just clinging onto life, you know, and not wanting to give up. And it's so sad, you know. So I really appreciated what Prabhupada has given us, you know, that we have some deeper insight, some knowledge, you know. And I remember also there was one lady, she must have been at least mid-end 70 or something, you know, quite advanced age. And she was in the last stage of cancer. You know, she had this big bloated belly, which usually means liver cancer. Then there's all this water accumulating in the belly, and liver is usually, yeah, it's, you know, the last stage when the metastasis wander through the whole body. It's in the liver and the brain and the bones and so on, you know. So, but it was just so sad to see how she dealt with the whole situation. You know, she was really at the very last stage of her life. And usually when you take chemo, you lose the hair, you know, they fall out, but then later they grow back, you know, as a rule, you know. And yeah, but she had this wig on, you know, she had some wig, some artificial hair on. And it was just bright blonde, you know, she looked like a Barbie doll or something, you know, blonde curly hair, you know, when you're 75 at last stage of cancer, you know, this blonde curly hair, and then the red cheeks with makeup and lipstick, and oh no, you know, I was just thinking, my God, you know, how sad. It almost looked grotesque, you know, somebody in this phase and stage of life, you know, almost on their deathbed. And then they're just clinging onto the body and trying by hook or by crook look like they're 30 or something, you know. It's just sad. It's really sad, you know. But this is how materialists, you know, approach death, you know, with so much fear, so much denial, and so much ignorance. And oh my God, you know, yes. But for a devotee, very different, you know. A devotee sees death as this glorious moment when we can actually get out of here, you know. A devotee sees death as Krishna's loving embrace. Come, you know. Krishna's been waiting for us for so many lifetimes. So why, you know, by hook or by crook, wanting to stay here? You know, he's been inviting us, come, come. So finally we can go, you know, but then no, I've got so many important things here to do, and oh, my family and this and that, you know, yeah, so, but actually, you know, if we really prepare, and that's why this Vanaprastha Ashram is so important, because we are meant to cut these family attachments. They're especially deep, you know. So if we actually if we can take advantage of this Vanaprastha Ashram and really try and apply ourselves as much as we can, and we deepen our absorption, and we, you know, we free ourselves from so much luggage and burden, you know, then surely, you know, we can meet death in a very different spirit and actually can look forward to it, and we can simply, you know, surrender to Krishna's loving embrace, and we can simply put our life in Krishna's hands. Okay, Krishna, I'm ready. Whatever you like, you know, please do with me whatever you like, you know. So it is really a very different approach, you know, of a devotee and a non-devotee, how they meet death and what attitude they have, you know, very, very different. And I mean, in this regard, Prabhupada gives this analogy of the cat's jaws, you know, and for a kitten, the jaws, you know, the mouth, cat's mouth. And for the kittens, the jaws of the cat is like the loving care of mother cat, you know. She picks up the kittens with her jaws and brings them here, brings them there. So for the kittens, the jaws are, you know, signifying care and protection and shelter. Whereas for the mouse, you know, the jaws, the same jaws, signify fear and death and, you know, cruel death. Of course, we can say, well, the cat eats the mouse, so that's why the mouse sees the jaws like that, but she doesn't eat the kittens. Yeah, so, but it's simply an analogy, you know, showing that death for a devotee is like for the kittens when the mother cat comes and picks them up with the jaws and simply takes them from one place to another, whereas the mouse is full of fear, and yeah, for the mouse it's the end of everything, you know. Yeah, and I mean, also interesting to remember that the whole Srimad Bhagavatam comes about by Parikshit Maharaj inquiring about the duty of a person facing death, you know, and that's how the whole Bhagavatam comes about. And so this is so relevant for us, and we should be inquiring about the duty of a person facing death. And then, you know, if our ignorance is dispelled, then also we will certainly lose our fear of death, you know. And yes, as it is said in this one purport, that already as soon as we take birth, we are actually dying. We are moving closer to death. And we can say, you know, in English language, we are 5 years old. Old means closer to death. We don't say I'm 5 years young or 10 years young or 60 years young, but no, old means, you know, we're closer to death. So that's actually the fact, you know, but we are very expert in blending out this fact, and we keep ourselves in this illusion that we will be here forever. Yeah, that's really how Maya is covering over the living entities, you know. And I mean, in the, you know, we have some nice examples in the Shastra and also from life in ISKCON, you know, where personalities meet death in a very glorious way. My favorite example is always Vitrasura, who is a great devotee, but he is in a demon's body. He was Chitraketu in his previous life, and Mother Parvati cursed him to take birth as a demon, and he humbly accepted that curse. And then he had to fight against Indra, and he knew exactly, you know, Indra would kill him. But he was so joyfully fighting, you know, and even though in that fight, Indra once dropped his weapon, and usually when somebody drops a weapon, it means you're defeated. And, you know, Indra was hesitant, oh, what am I going to do now? I dropped the weapon. But then Vitrasura was preaching to him, come on, pick up your weapon, do your duty, you have to fight. And so Vitrasura knew exactly after this fight, he will go back to Godhead. And he very gloriously, you know, engaged in this fighting, doing his duty. And yeah, and then the last part, as far as I remember, it took a whole year to cut off Vitrasura's head, you know, because he was in this gigantic demon's body. So it took a whole year. But Vitrasura was, you know, he withdrew, and he was in samadhi, actually. He was in ecstasy. And simply waiting, you know, until his head would be cut off, his neck through, you know, so he could leave. And we could even compare this to a final disease, let's say, you know, having cancer or something. And you know you're going to be defeated, you're not going to recover, but you just gloriously, you know, go along with it. And yeah, and this 1 year, which it took to cut his head off, one could say this is, you know, the time span the cancer takes to finally, you know, finish off the body. So Vitrasura just joyfully accepted that, because he knew, you know, he will finally go back to Godhead after that. So there was no fear, no fighting against it or something. So it's for me, I find this a perfect example of how actually a devotee meets death. you know, in a very glorious and positive outlook, and not lamenting and fighting against it and so on, you know. Also, Dhruva Maharaj, when he left his body, you know, death came actually to pay obeisances to him. And Dhruva Maharaj put his foot on his head so he could get on the plane back to Godhead. So Dhruva Maharaj takes, you know, death personified as a stepping stone. You know, he puts his foot to enter the plane. You know, so this is also a nice picture for us to understand how a devotee accepts death. It is simply, you know, the stepping stone to, go back home, back together, to get on the plane, hopefully, you know. And also in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we can read the pastime how Shiva's Pandit's son left his body during a kirtan, and Shiva's Pandit's wife was all lamenting, and then Mahaprabhu noticed, oh, something is not quite right here, you know, and then he realizes, then Shiva's Pandit told him, yeah, my son just left his body, and you know, because the mother was lamenting, so actually Shiva's Pandit's son came back and preached, you know, and said, so why are you lamenting? My time is simply up. I'm moving on. So there's no reason to lament and cry and all this, you know. And then he left, you know. So there's quite a few nice examples in the Shastra, you know, of personalities leaving. And also, of course, Srila Prabhupada's departure, very glorious, you know, how he left in such a focused way and simply considering his body like a vehicle, you know, simply tossing up, is this vehicle still useful for traveling and preaching, and or if it's not useful, all right, let me just give it up. So there was complete detachment there and no lamentation, and you know, and he simply demonstrated to us all how one is meant to leave this world in glory and dignity, and not hanging on to life and being on all different machines there in ICU or something, you know. It's it is nice if we can save ourselves that, you know. So of course sometimes we might just get caught up in that situation or something, you know. That's the problem, you know. Once we admit ourselves to hospital, then very easily we can't just get out anymore, you know. Then we're in the whole system and we're just caught up there, and you know, but it is not such a, at least in our situation, not such a helpful way to live, because we do need the devotees, you know, to actually chant the holy name for us, and so on, you know. Also, Gaur Govinda Maharaj had a very glorious departure, you know, on Bhaktisiddhanta's appearance or disappearance day. I can't quite remember. I was even at that time in Mayapur, actually, when he left his body, but I guess I was too young a devotee to realize, you know. But yeah, some of you may know Madhavananda Prabhu wrote this nice book, you know, When Good Fortune Arises, the whole biography of Gaur Govinda Maharaj. And there it is very nicely described, you know, that he was in his room surrounded by devotees, and they were asking him some questions about Lord Jagannath and Rath Yatra, and so Maharaj was just absorbed in sharing the pastimes, and all of a sudden he just, you know, fell unconscious. And actually the doctors, you know, who came, they said it is not an ordinary unconsciousness, but it is something very extraordinary. And then he just didn't wake up from that. You know, he just left, you know. And he even gave some little indications on the day, you know. He was a little tired, you know, of, there was all kinds of politics going on and so on, you know. And he gave this hint and said, yes, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he also just, he was sick and tired, and he just left out of his own accord, you know, and I may just do a similar thing or something like that, he said on that day. And then surely enough, he did leave in a very, very unusual and extraordinary way, you know. So, yeah, so we have a few quite amazing examples, you know, in the Shastra, as well as also amongst the sadhus of ISKCON. Yes. So much as a little introduction. Now, I'm not sure, shall we have a look if there's a few questions? Or, I mean, this was just the introduction. Maybe we just continue, if you don't mind, and we stop a little later, because, yeah, there's still quite a few topics, you know, which I'd like to cover today. So let me continue. I hope you all have the materials. A couple of people came a little later, because now there's quite a few quotes, you know, so it would be good if you can download the materials. Then it's simply easier to follow up and be attentive if you can read along, you know, rather than just hearing. Yeah, so let us understand what actually happens at that moment. So we can view death as being really our final exam, where we are tested what is most important and dear to us. Is it Krishna? Or are there so many other things which are more important and more dear to us? That's basically what happens at that moment. So, and if there's other relationships which are more important to us, well, then we may have to come back and finish these more important things, you know. That's why, you know, later on here on the bottom of the page there, Bhagavad Gita 5:8, Antakale chamame vasman muktva kaleva. So there Krishna says, and whoever at the end of his life quits his body remembering me alone, you know, at once attains my nature of this, there's no doubt. So it's Krishna alone. That's not so easy. It's a challenge. It's not remember Krishna and my husband, my wife, my child, my grandchild, my cat, my dog, whatever it may be, you know, but it is Krishna alone. So that makes it very clear, you know, that we are tested. Who is most important and dear to us, you know? Yes, and that requires some preparation, you know. Especially in India, people often have this attitude, yes, while I'm young, let me enjoy life, and there's so many important things to do for me. And then when I get old, then I surely will take up this Hare Krishna chanting and so on. But yeah, the time might not be enough then when we take it up in the later stage, you know. So because it's not so easy, we will discover that we actually have to completely transform our subtle material body and fully spiritualize it. But in any case, it is quite interesting to understand that really death is the only thing in life which is 100% sure. Only thing, you know. Anything else in life, maybe it will happen, maybe it will not happen. But death, 100% sure. It surely will all happen to each and every one of us. Definitely, definitely. But still, you know, we keep ourselves in such illusion and pretend that it will never happen to us. It happens to so many other people, but not to me. No, of course not, you know. And then when death knocks on our door, oh, so unexpected. How could this happen? You know, what is this unexpected? It just shows how much we keep ourselves in the illusion. We have to expect it at any time, you know. So this is really such an amazing thing. And one would think that if something is 100% certain, An intelligent person would inquire, what happens at that moment? How can I prepare myself? What happens afterwards? Can I somehow have some influence on this? What happens afterwards? I mean, that should be the logical thing. If we know that something is unavoidable, inevitable, it will happen. So then there should be some inquiry, But yet, most people in this world are not inquiring at all. Let's be clear. And even amongst devotees, I have encountered this quite a lot, that people are so shocked when all of a sudden their mother or somebody dies. And, but my God, Krishna consciousness is all about preparing for that. How can we keep ourselves in this illusion, that it will not happen? And then if it happens, I'm so shocked, so unexpected. How could this happen? It just reflects how much we keep ourselves in illusion of this, And of course, I've had 2 times cancer, so that is a great preparation. It's like a rehearsal for the final exam, So that's why these, experiences are actually truly very dear and important to me, because since then, my first cancer experience is now 13 years ago, 2007. I wasn't even 50 then, so since then I'm almost remembering this every day, that sooner or later the time will come. My days are numbered. I have only so much time in this body left to prepare, and that gives an urgency to one's Krishna consciousness. We realize, I have a limited amount of time, and I want to use every moment in a meaningful way to get ready, Yes, in that sense, it was really such an important experience for me, because it really shakes us up, I often feel death is the only thing that can really shake us up and, and make us realize that we have to really apply ourselves sincerely to this process if we don't want to come back again and again and again, And there's this famous story where Yamaraj is asking Yudhishthira Maharaj, what is the most amazing thing in this world? And Yudhishthira Maharaj gives exactly that answer. He says, yes, even though every day so many people are dying, we are surrounded by death, surrounded, not only people, but even when we go for a walk, there's dead animals and insects and this and that. My God, we are surrounded by death every day, But still, those who stay behind, they keep themselves in this illusion that it will never happen to them, happens only to others. Oh yes, how terrible. But people think, no, not to me, how could it be? So, Yudhishthira Maharaj says that's the most amazing thing, And we're making so many plans how to live nicely, but instead we should actually make plans how to die nicely, actually. And if we make plans how to die nicely, then we also live nicely, because that's Krishna consciousness. But if we only make plans how to live nicely, we're not living nicely and we're not dying nicely. We're losing out, But by actually making plans how to die nicely, we win double. We will have a glorious departure. And we also have a very joyful life in Krishna consciousness. And that's actually really what Krishna consciousness in essence is all about, that we plan how to leave this world nicely, gloriously, successfully, getting out of here, So we can see death actually as a mysterious transformation. As we all know, so the soul leaves the gross body and is carried by the subtle body of mind, intelligence, thoughts, ego to the next existence. So it's actually quite an intriguing, mysterious transformation that takes place there, you know. We can compare it with a caterpillar who transforms into a butterfly, flies off. He leaves, you know, the empty, dry caterpillar shell behind and transforms into a butterfly, you know. Or also we can compare it with different things that happen in nature, especially now in winter season. Many animals, they go in hibernation, you know, they hide somewhere and they sleep. They just go in deep sleep. And this is quite amazing, actually, you know, like the hedgehogs, you know, hedgehogs that have the little spikes. We have them in Europe a lot, you know, they're in the gardens and in the forests. So they go in hiding in winter and their whole metabolism changes, their breathing goes really slow. They don't eat and drink for 4 or 5 months, you know. I mean, this is almost a miracle how a living entity can survive like this, you know. And then when it becomes warm again, springtime, then they come out again and come back to life. So, all right, there the soul stays in the same body, you know. But basically, this is what death is like, that we go into an inert stage, an unconscious, deep sleep kind of thing, you know. And then everything starts all over again in a new body. But the animals, they stay in the same body, you know, like snakes also hibernate, you know, in Mayapur or in Australia, you know, in the cold season, they hide somewhere and they don't move and they are inert, they're somewhat unconscious type thing, you know, and then when it gets warm again, they come out again and move around. So even trees, plants, you know, the trees, plants, they look dead, or the leaves are dropping, they look completely dead. There's no life there, no growth, no flowers, no fruits, nothing. It's all dead, you know, and the life force, I dare say, it probably goes into the roots, you know, because there's a little warmer. So it looks completely dead. And then when spring comes, it's all reawakening and comes back to life, you know. So the winter season, you know, I mean, even spring, summer, autumn, winter, we can compare to these stages in life of birth and then growth and then creating byproducts and then gradually dwindling, you know, the autumn is already the dwindling season. So, and then winter is like the deep sleep, you know, the unconscious deep sleep. And then spring, it all comes back to life, you know. It's like the cycle of life actually reflects in the seasons, especially here in Europe, you know, like other countries, Australia, you hardly have any difference between the seasons. There's no proper winter, and from one day it becomes all of a sudden hot and so on, you know. So, but here in Europe, you have really these strong seasons, you know, and we can very nicely compare them to the cycle of life in one body, actually, you know. Let us read a few little quotes here, which exemplify that more. We have 10th canto, 13th chapter, verse 58. Lord Brahma's external consciousness then revived, and he stood up just like a dead man coming back to life. Opening his eyes with great difficulty, he saw the universe along with himself. So now we have the purport. And I believe this is still Srila Prabhupada, 13th chapter of 10th canto. We actually do not die, Prabhupada says. At death, we are merely kept inert for some time, just as during sleep. At night we sleep and all our activities stop. But as soon as we arise, our memory immediately returns and we think, oh, where am I? What do I have to do? This is called subtotita nyaha. Suppose we die. Die means that we become inert for some time and then again begin our activities. This takes place life after life, according to our karma, our activities, and svabhav, our nature, or nature by association. Now, in the human life, if we prepare ourselves by beginning the activity of our spiritual life, we return to our real life and attain perfection. So very nice description, you know. It's simply, we simply enter an inert stage, some deep sleep for some time, whatever time it may be. I'm not quite sure. People often ask me, but I'm not so expert. And it probably is also a very individual thing, you know, of whatever our destination is and this and that. So, but it is simply a sleeping stage, and then we, you know, we start all over again. It's not such a horrifying thing. What makes it so horrifying to us is simply our attachment to the body, nothing else, really. You know, we identify so much. That's all, you know. And then, of course, 2:13, famous verse, Dehinus Minyatade, as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Yeah, so let's become sober and let's not be bewildered by it, you know. And then another nice example, you know, analogy in 2:22. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. You know, also very, very nicely described what's happening, you know. So at some stage, this body is just going to become old and useless. How some jeans or some coat or a dhoti, sari, whatever it may be. You know, we just wear it out, we finish it off, and then we look at it, is it worth to fix it? No, let's get rid of it, throw it out. No use, you know, to hang on to it, you know. So that's the same thing what happens with the body, you know, at some stage. It just becomes useless. We cannot really use it in service anymore. It's not worthwhile trying to fix it, you know, so let's just get rid of it, give it up, you know. Yeah, rather than clinging on to no, one more year and you know, oh, what for, you know, what for? There's also another nice analogy in 10th canto, 20th chapter, verse 37. The fish swimming in the increasingly shallow water did not at all understand that the water was diminishing, just as foolish family men cannot see how the time they have left to live is diminishing with every passing day. And the purport. After the raining season, the water gradually goes down, meaning, you know, when in the raining season, I experience this often in Bangladesh, you know, the raining season comes and everything is flooded. So, and then gradually the water goes down. And what happens is that when it's flooded, all the fish are swimming around there, right? And then when the water goes down, the fish gradually get stuck, you know, in the mud, but they don't realize. So after the raining season, the water gradually goes down. But stupid fish do not understand this. Thus, they are often stranded on the lake shores and riverbanks. Similarly, those infatuated with family life do not understand that the remainder of their life is constantly decreasing. Clock time is ticking. Thus, they fail to perfect their Krishna consciousness and are stranded in the cycle of birth and death. Yeah, so for me, this example is especially funny because I have seen so often, you know, in Bangladesh, how the water goes down. And then what happens? The fish really get stuck in the mud. And then all the kids, they go in the mud and catch the fish, you know, and they all collect them and take them home and eat them. You know, so you see this when you travel, how the kids are there up to the knees in the mud and they're catching all the fish that are stuck in the mud, you know. So that's why, yeah, this is especially humorous for me, you know, because this is really what is going on in Bengal, where the monsoon season is quite strong and it's flooding and so on. So the stupid fish gets stuck and nicely swimming around, has no clue, you know, doesn't understand, or the water is going down. It's just a question of time. You're going to be stuck in the mud, you know. So it very very nice analogy for a human being in the material world. You know, we're just swimming around here. We're enjoying life. We think it's never going to end, you know, and we make so many nice plans like the stupid fish there. And we don't realize, hey, we're going to be stuck here. You know, time is decreasing. We have only a certain amount of time left. So we better take this seriously and get out of here, you know, like that. And the last quote in this row, 42966, the mind is the cause of the living entities attaining a certain type of body in accordance with its association with material nature. According to one's mental composition, one can understand what the living entity was in his past life, as well as what kind of body he will have in the future. Thus, the mind indicates the present and future bodies. Yeah. So the mind, you know, is like the, you know, the main, in one sense, it's the main part of the subtle body. And really, according to the composition of the mind, meaning what kind of desires and attachments are there in the mind. So that determines our next destination. Right? So the subtle body of mind intelligence for its ego takes the soul, you know, to the next existence and leaves the old and useless shell there, the body behind, you know. And as we said, yes, Krishna says, we have to remember him alone, so not such an easy thing. It requires preparation. And I mean also, you know, in 1515, Savasya Chamridi Sanivisto Matasmita Jnanam Purnam Cha. So Krishna says, I'm seated in everyone's heart, and from me comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So actually, this is really an interesting point, that remembrance actually comes from Krishna. We can't force our way into, you know, remembering Krishna. We can't demand. We can only try our best, but ultimately Krishna has to appear on the level of our mind. And he does only if we really are sincere and we try and do our very best in developing our relationship with him. Then he mercifully agrees to appear on the platform of our mind. So we can't think that, yes, I will just remember Krishna and no problem. You know, it doesn't work like that. Actually, I remember when I was a very new devotee, I was just, you know, 6 months in the movement or something. I was in Australia at the time, and I needed just a very little minor surgery, but I had to have some full anesthesia. And I had heard, okay, we should remember Krishna at the moment of death. So I was thinking to myself, okay, let me try at that moment when I fall unconscious through the anesthesia to just remember Krishna. And, you know, I went to the hospital with this full intention, I'm going to try and remember Krishna at that moment. But then, you know, when I woke up again, I had to realize with quite a bit of a shock, actually, that I wasn't remembering Krishna at that moment. Even though, you know, compared to leaving one's body, this was not such a challenging experience. It was a harmless little surgery, you know, of just, you know, half an hour. Something was nothing complicated or life-threatening. So I wasn't even scared or worried or anything, you know, but still, even then, in such a relatively relaxed situation, I did not manage to remember Krishna. And that really made me think that, you know, that was one of my first realizations, that I thought, okay, not so easy to remember Krishna. And yeah, very clear. So I was a very young devotee at the time, and Krishna did not agree to appear on the level of my mind, you know, within my mind. But then there's other nice examples. In Ukraine, there's one Mataji. She, you know, she is a sincere devotee. She practiced for quite a few years, you know, 20 years or something, 25 maybe. So, and some years ago, she had a stroke, and she was paralyzed on the right side, which usually goes together with loss of memory and loss of speech. So in her acute phase, she could not remember anything. Everything was deleted from her memory. She didn't even know her name. She couldn't speak Russian. Everything was blank, completely blank. You know? Yes. So then usually, as a rule, memory and speech return, you know. I used to work as a physiotherapist, so I used to work with people like that. So with enough training, memory and speech can return. So, and then when she recovered and I met her again, I asked her, so what was it like? What was it like to just, you know, I mean, it's hard for us even to remember. Well, how would you feel when you cannot remember anything, not even your name, where you are, in which country, nothing, you know, you can't say anything. It's all completely deleted, the whole program deleted. So I asked her, so what was it like? And she gave this interesting answer. She said, yeah, well, it was interesting, and it was also a little scary. But then she said, but one thing happened. There was one thing I remembered, and that was the Maha Mantra. And I simply chanted the Maha Mantra in my mind, and I knew I would be all right. It made me so peaceful, and I knew I would be all right. And I mean, that cannot even be explained from a medical point of view. You know, how is it that a person cannot remember their own name even? Nothing. Can't say anything. But the Maha Mantra, they can remember. I mean, my God, you know, this is really a proof that it is up to Krishna. And Krishna, you know, can be so kind to appear within our remembrance, you know, and yeah, in the form of remembering the holy name, you know. So yeah, and so she was just chanting within her mind, and that made her very peaceful, you know. And there's a similar story. I think, did I tell this already in the last seminar or something, with Mother Isha, who also had a stroke? I like to tell these stories, so sometimes I can't remember whether I told it here or somewhere else, you know, because I'm giving other classes too. But anyway, let me just quickly tell it, you know. Mother Isha, a Prabhupada disciple, she also had a stroke, same thing, also paralyzed right side, lost memory and speech, couldn't remember anything. So, and unfortunately, or fortunately, you can also say, depends on our transcendental vision, she didn't recover. And one thing also, the only thing she remembered was the holy name. And well, one thing is unfortunate. She ended up in a nursing home, in a non-devotee nursing home, which is very unfortunate that we have not established enough support systems and culture that we have to take care of our elderly devotees, So she ended up in a nursing home, but she was singing all day the Maha Mantra through the corridors in the nursing home. Everybody knew her as, oh yeah, the lady who's doing this Hare Krishna chant. Yeah. She's in the room such and such. Everybody knew her. And she was singing, full on the whole day, just the Maha Mantra. So, and His Holiness Niranja Swami, he knew her quite well because she was in Boston when he joined there as a new bhakta. And he said, Mother Isha, she's like my mother in Krishna consciousness. She was already at that time around 50 or something when he was a young bhakta. So she must have cared for the young devotees there, we can imagine. And I've seen photos of her. She had this really motherly round face and so on, So in any case, Niranja Swami was a little upset that she ended up in the nursing home. And he wrote some articles about this whole story on Dandavats also. And one day when she was in the nursing home, he actually drove there, he had some devotees driving him there to visit her. And then this interesting situation happened that she couldn't recognize him, And he was trying to connect with her. Oh, Hare Krishna, I hear this is Niranjan, you remember me and this and that. But she was, all she was doing was singing Hare Krishna. And he was first a little disappointed. Oh, I drove all the way here to visit her. Now she doesn't even remember me. But then he was so humorously saying, well, I guess the most important thing, she remembered the Maha Mantra. So this is so much more important than remembering me. Who cares whether she remembers me or not? Main thing is she remembers the Maha Mantra, and she just chants and sings that all day. And meanwhile, she has left her body, hopefully also singing the Maha Mantra. But I mean, with the transcendental vision, you can really see this as Krishna's jokes. Krishna is just giving this person, this situation, that person, that situation. All right, let her have a stroke. But and she forgets all this useless nonsense. Everything that's not important anymore is taken away from us through the stroke. So, and everybody else thinks, oh, how unfortunate, poor Mother Isha. She can't remember anything. But no. This is the mundane vision. The main thing is she remembers the Maha Mantra. Krishna is so merciful that he takes all this nonsense away from her and she, can't remember. So, and it's just Krishna's jokes, One can see it in that way that, he gives everybody a certain situation and so on, And I mean, my mother, as I mentioned, she's 90 and she often complains, my memory is so bad. I can't remember anything, no names and this and that. And I'm always preaching to her and say to her, Mum, it's God's arrangement that you just, don't burden your brain with all unnecessary stuff. The main thing is you remember the Lord. That's what you have to concentrate on. It's good to forget this and that. It's just part of Krishna's arrangement to prepare us for the moment of death, that we only remember him alone. That's what he's saying, So then sometimes he makes some arrangements that people have some stroke and they can't remember anything else, but he allows them to remember, him in form of the holy name. And I mean, no medical explanation is there to explain such a phenomenon, that people remember the holy name, but they don't remember their own name and not anybody else in the family, but holy name they remember, So this is always almost a little mysterious, Yeah, so, and then we have Also nice examples again in the Shastra illustrating that according to the composition of our mind at the moment of death, that's what, determines our next existence. So famous one, Bhardmaj, this should be a big warning that even Bhardmaj, who was on the level of Bhava, which is a very high advanced level, where you experience transcendental emotions. But even on that level, these transcendental emotions can transform back into material attachments, So that's his story, that he wanted to give shelter to the deer, and it all started so spiritually. This poor living entity, helpless deer, I have to give I'm a sage, I have to give shelter. But then he got so attached and, had the deer on his chest there at night, embracing it and sleeping in it and with it. And so next life, deer's body, that's how it can go. So of course, the deer was also a special deer, and he remembered his previous life, and he was actually repenting. And at his birth, he was immediately leaving his mother deer and going there to Pula Ashram and hearing from the sages and all this, So, and then his next life, he was Jada Bharat, also a special personality. So, and then, he left his body, as far as I remember. He went back to Godhead. So, yeah, but it should be a warning, to us that even on the level of Bhava, we have to be careful, otherwise the material attachment enters again. And I mean, in the last seminar where we were talking about mentorship, I gave a seminar with Russian translation. Some of you were there, Padma Sundari Mataji, you were there. I always use this example with Bhardmaj, that actually his problem was that he did not have a mentor. That was his problem. He didn't have anybody tapping him on the shoulder. Hey, it's enough now with the deer. Let the deer be deer and go back to your spiritual practice, So he went off track, and he didn't have anybody to, pull him back, because that's the thing. As long as there's some little material desires or attachments, we can't objectively assess ourselves, and then we easily go off track, So that's what happened with him. And then another famous story, which I quite often like to share also, it's a good topic for Sunday feast lectures, which often leaves deep impressions on people's minds. This is this famous story with the Prabhupada disciple Raghava Das, who left his body in a car accident when Prabhupada was still on the planet. He lived in London. He had a British male body. He was a brahmachari. And after coming back from book distribution, they had a car crash and he left his body. And Prabhupada was not disturbed. Prabhupada was still on the planet, and he said, oh yeah, it's all right. He will continue in his next life, no problem. So Prabhupada had completely the transcendental vision, and he was not confused and bewildered or, sad, for him it was all right, he will continue, no problem, So, and it so happened that Raghava, the soul which was in Raghava's body, took birth in a female Indian body, and her name is Ratnavali Devidasi. So if you Google Raghava and Ratnavali, you will get the whole story on internet. And this can be proven, through astrology, that yes, the same soul which was there in Raghava's body is now in Ratnavali's body. And also she had dreams, where some experiences came up in her mind from her life as Raghava. And also in London, there's one devotee who puts devotees under hypnosis. And under hypnosis, they can remember their previous life. So she also did that, and she could remember her previous life as Raghava. So it is pretty well established that, she was Raghava in her previous life. So, and she is now a disciple of His Holiness Bhakti Chud Swami Maharaj. So when he heard the first time about the story, he asked her, well, what happened? How come you ended up in a woman's body, Indian woman's body? How is this? What did you think at the time of death? How did this happen? So, and she researched this, and she asked different devotees who knew Raghava, Prabhupada disciples. Actually, on my last visit to a Bhaktivedanta Manor last year, I met the driver who drove the car when that accident happened. Yeah, Prabhupada disciple. He's also still around, So it was interesting for me. So in any case, Ratnavali Mataji researched this topic. What happened? What did she think? So, and then devotees remembered, oh yeah, Raghava, he was a Sankirtan devotee. And very often on the weekends, he used to come back to the temple, and he was serving in the Pujari department. He was doing puja. So, and the Pujari department, there was this Indian Mataji who was serving in the paraphernalia room, polishing the brass and. So, and of course, most people, when they hear this, they think, oh, yes, so here we go. They must have had some love affair or something, But no, it wasn't like that. It was the opposite. There was always a bit of tension and quarreling there amongst them, And we can just imagine, maybe Raghava was not satisfied how she polished the brass, or the flowers have no smell, or this or that, as life goes there in the Pujari department. So there was always a little bit of tension and quarreling and tension there. So, and that was enough for Raghava to do another round in the material world. Wow, that is an interesting point, that not only do we have to overcome our attachments and attractions, but also our aversions. Yeah, that is an important thing, And we always say attraction and aversion are the two sides of the same coin. So if we are averse to something, this actually also means there is a certain attachment behind it, the attachment of being against something, averse, or against somebody, So that is also an attachment, actually. So, yeah, I mean, wow, when I heard the story first time, I realized, not so easy to go back to Godhead, We have to also work through our aversions. And I think, if we reflect on our own life, there may be quite a few things we are averse to, or maybe even people we are averse to, So that is binding, because it's also a material attachment, that the mind is materially, occupied there with aversions. And with that, we cannot go back to the spiritual world. No chance. So that binds us too, So, yeah, this is quite astounding, And one may say, Raghava was a Prabhupada disciple, he was a brahmachari, he was a book distributor, leaving his body on the battlefield there of book distribution. Surely he would have gone back to Godhead, one may say, But no, he didn't. And Prabhupada knew it. He said, yeah, he will continue in his next life, And yeah, I mean, I sometimes like to point out especially when brahmacharis are in the audience, that I say to them, see, it's not enough just to be a brahmachari. So, because also sometimes brahmacharis protect themselves just by being averse to women and, oh, they're all Maya and they're all so bad and this and that. Sorry, this aversion is just as binding. Yes. Yeah. So we have to really, to be detached means that we are neutral, we are not in favor of it, but we're also not dead against it, so then we can hope for some detached position there. But as long as we are so against something and averse, then this is also not so good, and it is binding. And then another interesting point in regards to Raghava and Ratnavali, that Ratnavali Mataji took birth with some birthmarks, one on the forehead and one big one across the belly, a birthmark. So babies sometimes have these marks when they take birth. And I remember this from my time as a physiotherapist. I used to, for some time, work with early born babies. And through reflexes, you can have an influence on their motoric development. And I distinctly remember I was in one university clinic there working, and there was these babies with birthmarks. And I asked the senior doctor, oh, why do the babies have birthmarks? And he gave me this typical answer, babies have these things, nobody knows. That was his answer. But no, we know why babies have birthmarks. No, anybody can understand why babies have birthmarks? Well, just to save time, let me tell you. The birthmarks that Ratnavali Mataji had were exactly on those parts of the body where Raghava had the injuries in the car accident. Yeah. He had a trauma on the head and he had a trauma across the belly. And it's very clear, in that impact, in that traumatic impact of an accident, the mind thinks, oh, my head, oh, my belly. And then when the soul is kicked out of the body, the subtle body accompanies the soul with that traumatic experience of, oh, my head, oh, my belly. So, and then in the next body, that manifests as birthmark. So, I mean, that's a medical proof how the soul, travels on the subtle body from one existence to another. Yeah, I mean, this is quite mind-boggling, And I have been told, devotees have told me that meanwhile, even scientists also get this point. I haven't researched it further, but apparently there is a book out where one scientist also has researched this, and he also came to this conclusion that these birthmarks are related to the previous life and how a person leaves his or her body, that if it happened through some traumatic impact, then that is stored in the mind, and then the soul is carried to the next body, and there that traumatic impact manifests in the gross body, in the womb already. The babies are born with it. So, I mean, this is pretty amazing, Yes, yes. And even diseases we may have, they often also go together from previous life. I know one Mataji, she's very short-sighted, some -8 or something, can't see that much without glasses at all. Just very thick glasses. And she once told me that one person said to her, one astrologer said to her that in her previous life she was blind. So, and we can imagine, if a person really laments, oh, I'm blind, how terrible, I'm blind, this becomes a whole thing in the mind. So then when that person leaves their body, they also carry that impression into the next existence. And all right, then they may not be blind, but almost blind, completely short-sighted, you know. Yes. So, yeah, I mean, these are quite impressive proofs, you know, how the soul travels on the subtle body to the next existence, you know. So we can view death like being a journey into an unknown service situation, you know, as devotees. I mean, at least that guarantee we have that in our next existence, doesn't matter where it may be, we will still be with devotees and we will still be able to serve the Lord and his devotees. That much I think we can hope for, you know. So, but we don't know where, so it's simply an uncertain journey into an uncertain service situation. But luggage allowance is 0. You know, when you step on the plane, you can check in 20 kilos and 10 kilos hand luggage plus computer bag or whatever, you know, but on that plane, 0 luggage allowance. We have to free ourselves from everything. We have to throw everything overboard, you know, and we have to leave everything behind, gross and most subtle, you know. Yes. Yeah, so basically, the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and false ego, they have to be completely spiritualized and transformed. And all material aspects have to be dissolved, you know, and thrown overboard type thing, you know. So that's what actually the process of Krishna consciousness is all about. The process of Krishna consciousness is really targeting the subtle body completely. You know, that's why Krishna always says, fix your mind on me, always remember me. So it completely targets the subtle body of the mind. And then intelligence, false ego, they're so connected with each other, one can hardly even separate them, you know, because the mind affects the intelligence affects false ego, and backwards false ego affects the intelligence, and that again affects the mind. So they're so woven together there, like in the gross body, you can't distinguish between the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, air, ether, you know, they're all mixed here. So similar is also the subtle body, that these 3 elements are rather woven together and we can't so clearly separate them really, you know. But they have to be completely spiritualized and transformed. And only then we can go back to Godhead, actually. But as soon as there's some stronger material aspect still there, we may have to take birth again, you know. Of course, there's always Krishna's mercy and causeless mercy, you know, but we can't really count on that, you know. We can't just count on that. We have to try our very best, you know, to really dissolve all the material aspects of the subtle body, you know. So, and I mean, I dare say, you know, it's a blessing to get a serious warning so we can prepare, you know, like such a diagnosis of cancer. I see it personally as the biggest blessing. I wouldn't want to leave in a heart attack completely, you know, suddenly or something. And again, we can imagine it with traveling. You know, if somebody storms now in your room and says, quick, in a half an hour, you have to fly to India or something, you also be completely, oh my God, how am I going to get this already? And I have to still do this and that and empty the fridge and tell my friends and, you know. So it will be quite a sudden and chaotic departure, you know. But if you get a good warning, if you know, okay, in 2 weeks I'm flying to India, so you can prepare, you can meditate, You know, the mind is already going there, you know, and you can finalize all different issues and so on, and clarify things and so on, you know, and then boom, you can just go, you know. So same thing, if we get this warning in form of a final disease, you know, this, I see it as a complete blessing, because we can really prepare. And it's same like traveling, you know, when we go to Mayapur or Vrindavan, you know, then the mind goes already there, and we know already what we want to do and who we want to contact, and we meditate what it looks like, and so on, you know. So the mind is already there, and then we really want to go, you know. And same thing, if we know, so we have a limited amount of time left. So if we absorb ourselves, you know, and hearing, chanting, or also I like to look at the paintings, the BBT paintings. I think this is a very wonderful way of bringing the mind to the spiritual world, that we look at all the nice paintings. You know, Prabhupada was always saying they're the windows to the spiritual world. So I imagine this could be a lot easier to look at pictures than just hearing somebody reading the Bhagavatam to us or something. This can be, I mean, even in a healthy condition, it's often not so easy to concentrate if somebody's just reading to us or something, you know. Yeah, there is some nice pictures, you know. I mean, the BBT paintings, there's so many beautiful. I already picked my favorite paintings, and I hope I will get a chance to look at them before I leave, you know. Yes, because in your mind, you can really enter these paintings, you know. Yes. And yeah, and then you actually, I imagine, you know, if you actually prepare, then you come to the point where you just want to go. You know, and even if people are lament around you, oh, stay a bit longer, oh, what a shame. Oh, you're already there. You want to leave, you know. No, you don't want to stay, you know. Yeah, so it's, I really see it like a journey into a little bit unknown situation. And if we get the chance to prepare, then this is a great blessing, and we have some hope that we leave in a focused and peaceful and concentrated way, you know. Yes. All right, so there is still a little more, but let me see. I've talked for quite a while now, so I want to give you a chance to ask some questions. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have 2 questions. Sure.
I mean, maybe we can do it again like this, that we just answer now 1 or 2. And if there's more questions, then, because I did want to...
Yeah, there is one small question,
Okay.
and then for the bigger one, we will move to the end.
Okay, good.
So this is a question from Columbus Ramesh. Is it okay to remember your spiritual master while quitting body?
Okay, very common question. Well, it's a bit of a tricky one, because if we remember Guru with an emotional attachment, then this may be binding, you know? So our attachment has to actually be spiritual and not emotional. And this may be especially of interest to us ladies, because we have a more emotional nature. And, you know, like sometimes we can observe, you know, if ladies are actually emotionally not fulfilled, let's say they are not married, then sometimes the guru becomes almost like a bit of a substitute for a husband, and we expect some emotional care and satisfaction, and then the relationship is not so transcendental, right? So that's why it is actually highly recommended that our emotional needs should be fulfilled within family foremost, and maybe also other relationships. But the more we can, you know, satisfy our emotional needs within family relationships, that will free all other relationships from our emotional needs for satisfaction. And especially the guru-disciple relationship, it will free, So, let's say a lady is not married and her attachment to guru is pretty emotionally based. And I mean, gurus are well aware of this. I have heard gurus joking about it and how they feel like a substitute for a husband to their disciples and so on, so they're very well aware of this. And it's just the way it is, because our needs are more of an emotional kind. So we have to be careful that this emotional attachment doesn't enter our guru-disciple relationship, because if our attachment is of an emotional kind, then even though we may remember guru, we may still have to come back one more time or something. So it has to be transcendental attachment, Yes. Yeah. Okay. Anything else there, which is rather short?
Yeah, from Susmita. If someone has negative feelings towards me in relationships, is that going to bind me as well?
Well, it depends how you react to it, If you are aloof of it, then no, it will not bind you. If you're aloof of it, but if it pulls you into some negativity or some envy or some enmity or something, well, then it is binding, But if we are aloof of it and we are, well-wishingly disposed towards that person, and we are not reacting on that inimical platform, then it will not affect us, Yes. Anything else?
And she adds, especially when I am unable to fulfill one's expectations.
Especially when you are unable to fulfill one's expectations. I'm not quite understanding how that really connects, But in any case, let's just keep it at that, because I don't want to be sidetracked now into the discussion of fulfilling people's expectations or something, That's a different topic type thing. So I'd rather leave it at that if other people are negatively disposed towards us or averse towards us, it doesn't bind us if we are aloof. If you're talking about a marriage relationship and you may not be able to fulfill your husband's expectations or something, so marriage relationship, there is a lot of emotional involvement and attachment and so on, so then that is binding, whether we can fulfill the expectations of the husband or not, the family relationships in themselves are pretty binding, that's why this whole recommendation is there of the Vanaprastha Ashram, where we gradually, detach ourselves and so on, that's the point, Yes, I mean, are you still open to discuss a few more points?
Mataji, please, there is one additional question about spiritual master.
Okay, all right.
From another devotee. What if we experience the guru like a father? It's the same.
Doesn't matter whether father or not father, the point is the attachment emotional or not? Because I mean, if we compare to our physical family, the attachment to father is also usually emotional and binding in family relationships, So just the fact that we see Guru as a father figure doesn't mean there's no emotional attachment. You know, it's a tricky thing, you know, to really see how much are we emotionally attached and how much is it spiritual. I wouldn't want to go into this whole discussion now, you know, because it's also very subtle and so on, you know. But I mean, usually emotional attachment mainly manifests that we are dependent on the person's physical proximity, you know. That is a sign of emotional attachment. If we always want to be near this person and we cannot be without this person and so on, you know, then, yeah, because transcendental relationships are not so much dependent on this physical association and proximity, you know. So that can be a sign for emotional attachment, you know. Yes. Yes. Shall we continue a little bit more? Because otherwise tomorrow we want to have the last session and I'm just afraid we won't be able to yeah, make it through. Maybe because of, you know, time being a little tight, we skipped this first quote of 1:18:4, and because it's also a little lengthy, and you can just read it afterwards in your free time or something. Yeah, so let us just continue a little more now with understanding that all the material aspects, all the impressions, all the material samskaras, they have to be deleted and replaced with spiritual impressions. You know, looking at the mind now, how we transform the mind, you know, that's what has to take place, that the mind has so many mundane impressions, you know, we remember things from our karmic life and, you know, whatever it may be. You know, there's so many things stored actually from so many lifetimes because the same subtle body has been accompanying us for so many lifetimes. So that's why sometimes all different kinds of things come up in dreams and this and that. It's like a computer chip with so many impressions from so many lifetimes. And all that has to be transformed and spiritualized, and all the material impressions have to be deleted and basically replaced with spiritual impressions so that the mind is fully spiritualized, you know. And that's why the main rule in Krishna consciousness is to always remember Krishna and never forget him, right? And all other rules are meant to be the servants of this main rule, to always remember Krishna and never forget him. And that's why we read throughout the Bhagavatam so many instructions where, or Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, just fix your mind on me, always fix your mind on me. So that remembrance of Krishna, you know, that transforms the mind, you know. And not only that, that's why, for example, it is so important that we have powerful spiritual experiences, festivals, or visits to the Holy Dham, and retreats, and, you know, joyful events. So then if the more we put ourselves into situations where we have such impressions and experiences, you know, that also replaces all the mundane experiences. You know, I'm sure anybody here who has been around for quite a while, you know, you may also have that experience that your karmic life is so far away, it faded away so much. It's almost like previous lifetime, you know, especially when you've been around for quite a while and you've had so many deep and wonderful and colorful and joyful experiences in Krishna consciousness, then all this karmic stuff, it's completely fading away, you know. So, and that's how we gradually transform the mind. So very important is, you know, the absorption, the chanting, these nice experiences, powerful experiences, and of course also serving. You know, that's why in a younger stage of devotional life, we are engaged according to our nature, Vanaprastha, because a younger devotee, if a younger devotee serves according to their nature, they can more easily absorb themselves in serving. And that's helpful to transform the mind, to be deeply absorbed. How can I do this for Krishna? You know? So, and then as we advance, you know, we can absorb ourselves in remembering Krishna anyway, no matter what we do. The activities in itself are not so important. We can still absorb ourselves and apply ourselves with heart and soul. But in the beginning phase, it is easier for us if we do something which is according to our nature and our liking. So that's why the service with full absorption is also so important, because it transforms the mind, you know, by being deeply absorbed in service, you know. So in that way, we gradually transform and spiritualize the mind. And then interestingly, it is said that a person who is just about to leave their body, they see all the activities of their life like a fast-forwarded film. You know, so when we are there on our deathbed, just about to leave, our whole life is like a fast-forwarded film, and we see all the episodes again, you know. So now, depending on what kind of activities we've done, we either see a completely materialistic film there with all kinds of, you know, sinful activities and illicit sex life and drinking and what not, meat eating and or if we had a joyful life in Krishna consciousness, then we see a transcendental film, you know, very enlivening, you know. So, and then by the power of the mind being absorbed in something, like, for example, Krishna consciousness, very interesting, we can actually overcome the level of pain. Because very often people say, well, I'm not so afraid of actually leaving my body, but I'm afraid of the pain that comes along with it, right? Isn't it? We are afraid of that mainly, the pain. So now this is a very interesting point, that pain is actually experienced on the level of the mind. Yes. And for example, the principle is when the mind is very strongly absorbed in something else, especially something higher, we actually don't feel the pain. The mind is distracted from the pain. And I remember this, I hope you don't mind that I use myself as an example. When I was a youngster, you know, before I became a devotee, I used to play handball. And because I'm pretty tall, I was the goalkeeper. So I was in the goal, holding the balls, or sometimes not holding the balls. So, and I remember once I broke my little finger. It's still got a little bump there. And I broke it really drastically. It actually stood like on a 90-degree angle to the side. It's, you know, it was really so broken. I could feel crack, and it stood off to the side, you know. But because I had gloves on and I was so absorbed in the game, I did not feel any pain, nothing. And I continued playing with this finger standing to the side for half an hour. And I didn't feel anything, nothing, because the mind was completely focused on winning the game, and we won it, you know, but I didn't feel any pain. And then after the game was over, I took the gloves off and I saw my finger, and, oh, and then the pain hit, you know. Yes. So this is just a practical example to illustrate this point. If the mind is absorbed in something very intensely, you overcome the level of pain. And there's many stories like that also of war times, you know, when soldiers are hurt in the battlefield, and they're still that they're so absorbed in somehow surviving or helping a comrade to, you know, survive, and they carry a heavy injured person even though they already lost one leg or something. They, you know, all kinds of amazing powers come up when a person is trying to survive and struggle for life, and they don't feel any pain in that moment. You know, they can do all kinds of amazing things without pain, you know, because the mind is so fixed on surviving, you know. Or also example is mothers, you know, who save their child or something. They can also develop all kinds of amazing powers just by fixing the mind on, I want to save my child. And they can also do all kinds of miracles, and without feeling any pain or anything, just because the mind is so absorbed, you know. So now if we understand all that, we can realize, you know, that death is basically the test how much we can absorb ourselves in remembering Krishna. Yeah. And if we really remember Krishna, we overcome the level of pain. Yeah. But if our absorption in Krishna is not so strong, we are not so focused, you know, that every little pain distracts us, and now I have so much pain and I can't chant and so on. You know, so we can understand, you know, how often are we sick? You know, how often are we sick? And we can't even chant our rounds, and so on. So, you know, my God, how will we focus and chant when we leave our body? You know, so obviously we have quite a bit to practice and learn type thing, you know. So this is basically why death is, as a rule, combined with pain, because it's Krishna's ways to test us how much we are beyond the bodily platform, you know, because pain also is only experienced on the level of the mind, you know. On the level of the soul, there is no pain, you know, it's the mind. Hunger, thirst, pain, pleasure, all these things are just experienced on the level of the mind. So yeah, that's what is awaiting us, you know, that at the moment of death we are tested how much we can focus our mind on Krishna, you know, on something higher. And I mean, a very wonderful example is how Bhakti Tirtha Swami left his body. Yes. Radhana Swami spent the last 6 weeks with him, and he once gave a 5-hour Sunday feast lecture in Chowpatty after His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami left his body. And in that 5-hour lecture, you can still find it somewhere on the internet there. It is very impressive how Radhana Swami shares all kinds of amazing experiences when Bhakti Tirtha Swami prepared for leaving. And I mean, the situation was that they spent this time together in intense absorption in Shravanam, Kirtanam, reading the Chaitanya Charitamrita, having kirtans, and Bhakti Tirtha Swami was so absorbed that he became actually so blissful and joyful, even though from a material point of view, he was in such a suffering condition. He had already one leg amputated, and the cancer was all in the spine and everywhere, and his body was all skinny and emaciated. And actually, from a material point of view, he should have been so much in pain. The doctors were amazed. How is it that he's in such a joyful spirit? How is it possible? Somebody who is in such a suffering condition can be so joyful. So they couldn't even explain it, you know. But Maharaj, you know, Bhakti Tirtha Swami was so absorbed by, you know, through Radhana Swami's association and help. That's the point. We need the help of devotees at that moment, you know. So he was so absorbed. he came to the point where he said, actually, we are not reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, we are entering Chaitanya Charitamrita. And he was calling out, actually, life cannot become better than this. I wouldn't want to change my situation for any other situation, even if you give me thousands of dollars. I would not want to exchange my situation for any other. Yes. Because he completely transcended that level of pain, and he was actually so joyful, even though from a material point of view, it looked like he was in such a suffering condition, But that's the point, if the mind is fully absorbed, then we can really transcend the level of pain and distress and so on, And that's why here at the end of this lesson, I quoted this nice verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita in Madhya 4, 186. In the purport, it says there, an intense lover of Krishna does not care for any number of material discomforts, scarcity, impediments, or unhappiness. It is said that when one sees apparent unhappiness or distress in a perfect Vaishnava, it is not at all unhappiness for him. Rather, it is transcendental bliss. Yes. And Bhakti Tirtha Swami's, example really exemplifies this, that externally it looked like unhappiness and distress. But no, if a Vaishnava is a perfect Vaishnava, he can, through his absorption in Krishna consciousness, he can completely transcend that. And because he takes shelter in that distressing situation, then Krishna also manifests himself more tangibly. And that gives, the joy and bliss, even though externally he is in such a suffering condition, So yeah, it's quite an amazing thing, this Krishna consciousness, that by the power of Krishna consciousness, one can really transcend all this material suffering and distress. And that's what we are tested in the moment of death. In the moment of death, how much we can really absorb the mind, and focus. And I mean, a tiny little glimpse of this I also experienced in my cancer surgeries, because when you're facing such a situation, you are taking shelter, you really put yourself in Krishna's hands. And I have to say, for me, it was quite a joyful experience, believe it or not, even doing chemo and all that. Because of that thing, if we really take shelter of Krishna and call out to Krishna, then Krishna responds. He is more tangibly visible. And you can actually really be very joyful and satisfied. Even though from outside, a materialist cannot even understand this. How can you be happy doing chemotherapy or something, But yeah, for me, I could really put Krishna consciousness to a test in that situation. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. It actually works. You can actually be joyful even in such a situation, just by the power of Krishna consciousness, Yes. So and then as I was getting healthy again, then that mood of taking shelter fades away a little bit, and you almost think, oh, what a shame. It was actually so sweet, when you were sick and miserable. There was so much sweetness there, because you took shelter more, and now it goes back to normal. Life goes back to normal, Yeah, so that is like the challenge, in leaving one's body, that this pain and the external, the material distress is kind of Krishna's ways of testing us, how much we can really focus and how much we can take shelter, Yes. And also another interesting thing is that just by the power of the mind, one can actually hang around in a completely useless body for quite some time, just by the power of the mind. I also had that experience just shortly after. I had the good fortune to accompany my father in the last week of his life. And I was right there when he left his body. And shortly after, one devotee left his body in Mayapur, and I knew him from Ukraine. He was from Ukraine, from Kiev. And yeah, and it was shortly after my father left, so I thought, all right, let me spend a bit of time with him and let me share a few realizations and try to help him to focus on Krishna and the spiritual world and so on. But he had such a strong willpower. He wanted to stay in this body, you know, even though he had leukemia. He was quite young. He was only 34 or something. And he had leukemia, and he was so emaciated, so skinny, you know. I mean, he looked like a skeleton with skin over it. I had never seen such a skinny body, you know. I didn't even recognize him first because he looked so different, you know. But he had this real strong willpower to stay in this body. And the doctors were amazed. How is it possible that he's still hanging around? You know, how is it? He should be gone already a long time ago, you know. So just by the power of the mind, one can really hang around in a completely useless body. You know, that's how powerful the mind can be, you know. And sometimes we have this, that even, you know, amongst non-devotees, people say, oh, this person cannot leave, cannot die. So it's usually when the mind just cannot accept the fact that now it's time to leave, you know. So it is very much connected with our mindset, you know, and we know this from yogis. They can leave their body or they can stay for so much longer. Hiranyakashipu hanging around in some anthill there, you know, with bones and still being there alive and so on. So by the power of the mind, you know, one can really stay for a long time, you know, even though the body is rather useless. So that's why also Bhakti Tirtha Swami, he wrote this book, Die Before Dying, you know, that really the most difficult thing in the whole process of leaving is to accept the fact that death is coming and I have to accept it and so on, you know. That's actually in many ways, it is one of the main challenges, to just come to the point where the mind accepts, okay, looks like I'm going to have to leave, no way around it, you know. But while we're always fighting against it, it can be rather difficult to come to this point, you know, where we can go, you know. Yes, and already last time we mentioned that, you know, often we have to do so many therapies and go through so many treatments, even though there's no hope. And the main purpose of these therapy and treatments is just to bring us to the point where we accept the fact, looks like I have to go, no more hope, all my hopes are smashed, you know. And then we can accept, and then very often we very quickly leave, you know. But while we have this hope and we struggle and we want to leave, I mean, it's even when people stay in coma for a long time and so on, you know. Yeah, usually coma means there's some discussion there. So where will this living entity go and so on. And it's also when people cannot leave, you know, when they're really hanging on to their existence in this body and they want to stay, and then they hang in limbo there in between, you know. They're not gone yet, but they're also not here anymore. And they're in coma, unconscious, you know. Yes. Yes. Okay, so I think this is all we will mention today, since also we are already a little over time. So we have one more session tomorrow, same time, where we still talk about a few more aspects of transforming the subtle body. Now we kind of, in brief, we talked about transforming the mind, but tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about transforming the intelligence and also transforming the false ego. And then comes, the ultimate solution, how we prepare like that. Okay, so let us see if we have any more questions.
Yeah,
Do we have, yeah?
1 second. Susmita Mataji wrote a quite big sentence, and she wanted to turn on microphone to discuss. In general, question is about, I will read. I'm interested to know what happens after death of a devotee who has served the Lord as a pure devotee, and let's assume he has done everything right to serve the Lord in Goloka. So how does the soul move from this material universe to Goloka? How long does it take? Does Krishna take them personally? How do we travel as soul without our body from planet Earth through various higher planets, then Vaikuntha, then Goloka? Does this happen through the empowerment of our mind? I want to understand science behind this.
Well, I mean, to some extent, for me, the answer is enough to say, well, we will see when the time comes, So I don't have the answers to all these questions,
Okay,
but I mean, also it is said, for example, that before we actually enter the spiritual world, we may take one more birth wherever Krishna performs his pastimes. And we are a little more trained up there, to actually take part in Krishna's pastimes somewhere in this material world. So, I mean, certainly I'm not in this position to give some, general answers, what happens and so on. But as you see, let's conclude that it's not so easy to go back to Godhead. There's a lot of transformational work we have to do. Subtle body has to be completely transformed. So just externally go through the motions of Krishna consciousness and rattle down our round somehow or other, this may not transform the subtle body, Yes. Actually, if we will have time tomorrow, I would like to do a very short chanting exercise tomorrow. So maybe have your beads next to you. I would like to finish that. Sometimes I'm running out of time, but let's try and plan it in such a way that we will have time, because that chanting exercise is for most people, they experience it as a bit of an eye-opener, how we are actually meant to chant the holy name in order to prepare ourselves to really go back to Godhead, because some of you may know I also like to give holy name retreats and so on. And so, yeah, we will conclude tomorrow with the chanting, and please have your japa beads near you, and we can chant one round and do a little exercise there.
Sure.
So I'm sorry, I will not be able to give some whole answer there, how the soul travels and. But I mean, one thing is, as far as I understand, even in the spiritual world, we have a spiritual body, of course, but we also have a subtle spiritual body. So it's not that we have no mind and no intelligence and no ego. We just don't have the false ego, but we have the true ego of our eternal relationship with the Lord, So the subtle body will still be there. And the way I understand is that the soul travels on the subtle body also to the spiritual world, And I mean, even like, if a living entity also experiences some So hellish experiences, you know, has to go to the hellish planets. As far as I know, this also takes place in the subtle body, because in the Bhagavatam you read all these things that for certain sinful activities you're thrown in boiling ghee and this and that and so many horrifying experiences. I mean, what kind of gross body do you have to survive being thrown in boiling ghee? You know, so obviously this is taking place in the subtle body. And the mind, you know, experiences all these hellish, painful experiences, but actually without a gross body. Otherwise, how can it be, you know? So, yeah, so let's wait and see. I find it more important and relevant to understand how serious we have to prepare ourselves. You know, I rather focus on that. And let's see how we will get there. We will see. You know, that's not so important to actually know for us now, you know, because Krishna will take care of that, no problem, no doubt. You know, but let's concentrate on really taking this process of Krishna consciousness seriously. You know, that is so much more important for me anyway. You know, I don't worry so much how it exactly will happen and all this. Krishna will take care of it, no problem. What else? I can't hear you.
Sorry.
Yes.
Shwetadvipa asks, Mataji, what if there is no chance to prepare and have to leave suddenly in a sudden and chaotic way like an accident? How to prepare? How can we transcend pain during these accidents?
Actually, I do have a nice quote in this regard, but I wanted to leave this for tomorrow. Yes, because it is already pretty late. I think we'll keep that for tomorrow. So you please be there again tomorrow and you will find the answer. What else?
Acharya Nisthad Prabhu asks, some say that if the family members are devotees, there is no harm in being attached to them, or it's even beneficial. So why so important to detachment from the family?
I have not really heard this, you know, that when I mean, certainly when the devotees are, when the family members are devotees, this is very fortunate and lucky, but still the attachment, the family attachment is there. Definitely. I mean, otherwise there would be no need for all this Vanaprastha thing, you know. Yes. And I mean, also tomorrow we do have, you know, yeah, tomorrow there is a quote. I quickly read it today now, then we save time tomorrow. 11:6:7. There it says, now you should completely give up all attachment to your personal friends and relatives and fix your mind on me. Thus, being always conscious of me, you should observe all things with equal vision and wander throughout the earth. So, I mean, Krishna says, me alone, you know, me alone. He doesn't say me and your devotee son, father, husband, whatever, you know. It's me alone. Even if they're devotees, still, family attachments are so deep, you know, so deep rooted, you know. Yeah. There's so much emotional involvement there, you know. Yeah. So we have to give it up, definitely. That's the whole thing. Otherwise, otherwise, no need for Vanaprastha Ashram. If husband and wife are devotees, so let them remember each other. So beneficial, no need, you know. So no, we have to detach ourselves. That's the whole issue, even if they're devotees. Yeah. Okay. What else, Prabhu?
Chandra asks, what is the role of grief in preparing or for accepting death as a natural process?
Grief? About our own death? No, I'm not sure how you mean it. Can you explain a bit more?
Yes, Mataji, I would, Hare Krishna.
No.
Yeah, obviously it's not about our own death. I was referring to the death of others, could be friends or relatives in the devotee community or even outside of the devotee community. Is grief somehow involved in that process as a self-realized devotee?
Well, I mean, it depends, you know. Like, for example, it is really sad that when Guru leaves, you know, the disciples should be, you know, completely destroyed and grieving and mourning and so on. And you know, the disciple feels, this is the most horrible day of my whole existence, you know. So that is, you know, that is natural and wanted, you know. So I dare say there's, you know, more material grief and there's more spiritual grief and there's all kinds of mixtures and shades and grades, you know. So if our grieving is more material because we are missing that person and we, you know, I mean, as a rule, our grief is more centered around ourselves, you know, that we feel sorry for ourselves because we don't have that association anymore of the person or something.
Yeah.
You know, but usually, I mean, I dare say, you know, for other devotees, if we have a little bit of a spiritual vision, especially when they were sick or something, it's actually a relief and it's a joyful thing. And of course, there may be some pain because we're losing that association of that person, you know, but it is really a glorious and joyful thing, which we also celebrate, you know. So it is an interesting mixture of joy and glory on one side, but then also, of course, some pain of separation, you know. But I mean, like non-devotees, they're simply lamenting and feel pity for themselves, and it makes them more depressed. I mean, we can already say, you know, the sign for spiritual grieving or grievance is that it is not depressing. It is actually uplifting, you know, because we remember that person more intensely, and then that person is actually present through that remembrance and separation. So it is not a depressing grievance, you know, but actually it's purifying and uplifting. And it is a sweet pain because, you know, we remember that person more intensely. But if that grievance is material, then we drown in self-pity and depression and, oh, I can't live anymore and so on, you know. So that is a material grievance, you know, which is not beneficial. It's actually tamaguna, really, you know, because we're just going around in circles around ourselves and we feel sorry for ourselves and we lament and so on, you know. So that's usually what non-devotees go through, you know, and then sometimes even after years, they can't get themselves back into, you know, on their feet and all this, and they're just completely destroyed and depressed and don't want to live anymore and become more suicidal and all this. So this is definitely not you know, a positive grieving, you know, that is pulling us down, you know. Yes. What else? Anything else?
No new questions. And as I remember, you have a yagya today, so I think.
Yeah, that's true. Saturday evenings we have a nice fire sacrifice for Lord Nishingadev. The whole community comes together and we sing and all this, even though the whole country here in Germany is in lockdown or something, but here in Himachalam, you don't feel any of this, our life goes on like normal. And we just don't have so many visitors as usual, but still a few people we allowed to come, even though officially it's not really allowed or something, But yeah, it's true. Okay, well, thank you so much for attending, and I hope to see you all back tomorrow for the last session on this topic. So there will still be interesting things, so please be back tomorrow and we'll conclude the whole topic of Life Begins with 50. Okay, thank you so much. All have a nice evening or Dave, wherever you are. And we'll see you back tomorrow. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Hari.
Haribol.